At 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone on the granite kitchen countertop buzzed with a dry vibration. I was sitting there alone. The house was so quiet that the sound of that buzz felt like a gunshot signaling the start of a battle. I picked up the phone. A message from Derek, my only son. Dad, the plan has changed. You're not going on the cruise next week. Monica only wants her family there. For 40 years, I had poured countless drops of sweat onto wind-swept construction sites. I had worked until the skin on my hands split open to build a financial empire for my children. I had never begrudged them a single thing. I willingly stepped into the background so they could shine. But now the reward I received for all that sacrifice was nothing more than a short text message. A cold blade cutting me out of my own son's life. Betrayal always begins with the people you trust the most. I looked out the window. It was beginning to rain. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. My name is Harrison, 70 years old. Let me tell you what betrayers did to me and how I dealt with them. Leave a number 1 in the comments so we can continue the story and hit subscribe. I believe you're going to enjoy this story. 40 years in the construction industry taught me one thing. Every solid structure can collapse if its foundation rots from within. My entire life, I dealt with concrete, steel, and engineering blueprints. I knew how to spot a crack before an entire building came crashing down. But I failed to see the crack inside my own family. Until that morning, my hand was perfectly steady as I held my cup of black coffee. Not a single drop spilled over the edge. The calmness of a man who had managed hundreds of construction sites. But my chest tightened. A cold sensation ran down my spine. The cup of black coffee in my hand had gone cold. The phone screen had gone dark, yet Derek's words still felt like a 4-inch nail driven deep into my mind. That Alaska cruise was never just an ordinary vacation. It was a sacred mission I had planned for 3 years. The total cost was $45,000. Every penny came from my own account. It was money I gladly spent to fulfill the final wish of Diane, my late wife. Before she closed her eyes forever, after a long illness, she held my hand and wished that she could see the glaciers of Alaska just once. I made her a promise. I wanted to take the whole family there so we could honor the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for this home. And now Monica, my daughter-in-law, wanted to turn it into a private playground for her own Sterling family. The Sterling family. I knew exactly what they were like. They called themselves high society, dressing in expensive suits and hosting pretentious afternoon tea parties. They always looked at my rough, scarred hands with contempt. To them, an old construction contractor like me was crude and embarrassment to their elegance. Yet they had never refused a single dollar that came from these rough hands. From the mansion they lived in to the car they drove, everything had been built with my sweat and blood. Now Monica wanted to use my own money to bring her parents aboard that 5-star cruise ship. They wanted to enjoy luxury in Diane's name while pushing the man who paid for it into the shadows. I set my coffee cup down on the table. The ceramic struck the stone with a dry, hollow sound. I stood up and walked toward my study. The silence inside the house no longer broke my heart. It sharpened my mind. I turned on my computer and logged into the cruise line's reservation system. The instincts of a contractor with decades of experience told me that this crack had not appeared today. It had been carved deeper for a very long time. I entered the family's booking code. The screen displayed the list of VIP passengers. My finger moved from one name to the next. Derek's name. Monica's name. Her parents' names. I scrolled up and then back down. Completely blank. My name, Harrison, the owner of the credit card that had paid for this entire trip, was gone. Erased cleanly and neatly. Someone had tampered with the system to remove my name with surgical precision. They thought a 70-year-old man would do nothing but cry and accept his fate after being cast aside by his own children. They thought I was an old, crumbling block of concrete that could easily be crushed. But they were wrong. When you decide to demolish a building, you'd better be prepared for the dust and falling bricks to bury you as well. I clicked on the transaction history and the linked account details. As the first lines of data appeared on the screen, my eyes narrowed. A trap even more disgusting than stealing the cruise was unfolding right before me. The blue glow from the computer screen shone directly into my eyes. In the dark room, the numbers stared back at me with the cold precision of measurements on a flawed engineering blueprint. My name had been surgically erased from the cruise reservation system. In its place were 4 names belonging to the Sterling family, Monica's parents, and her 2 younger siblings. They had inserted their own names with shameless greed. These were the people who always dressed in expensive designer clothes, who never stopped talking about art and refinement. They looked down on my working-class background. Not once had they ever looked me in the eye when greeting me. Yet now they were preparing to step onto the deck of that cruise ship, raise glasses of premium champagne, and admire the glaciers of Alaska, all paid for by the money earned with these scarred hands of mine. The initial pain of being cast aside quickly disappeared. In its place came the frightening clarity of a man who had spent his entire life managing construction sites. I wasn't angry. When you discover that a steel beam has rusted, getting angry at the beam is pointless. You find the cause and you fix it. I moved the mouse and dug deeper into the change history. The reservation had been modified 2 days earlier. The login used was the secondary account I had trusted Derek to manage for our household expenses. My son had personally signed the order removing his own father. He had joined forces with his wife to turn the sacred promise I made to Diane into a gift meant to impress his in-laws. This betrayal wasn't an accident. It was deliberate sabotage. They had planned every step. They thought I was old. They thought I didn't know how to use technology, and that I wouldn't discover anything until they were comfortably aboard the ship in the middle of the ocean. But they had underestimated a 70-year-old construction contractor. I had built dozens of skyscrapers from empty lots. I knew how to spot the people who siphoned resources from a project. I continued scrolling down to the linked bank accounts section to review the payments for the onboard services. Then, another series of numbers caught my eye. It had nothing to do with the Alaska cruise. It was the statement for the joint savings account Derek and I shared, where I had left part of the emergency reserve for our family business. A series of withdrawals had been made over the past month. Every one of them was for an unusual amount. My heart skipped a beat as I studied the pattern of those withdrawals. The blueprint of another conspiracy, far darker and far more disgusting, was slowly revealing itself beneath my feet. I stared at the strange withdrawal amounts on the screen. A chilling suspicion began to take shape. I picked up my phone. I needed a direct explanation from Derek. My instincts would never allow me to wait once I discovered signs of structural failure. I pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 long times. The person who answered wasn't my son. It was Monica. Her voice came through the speaker, coated in sugary politeness. It was the same fake sweetness she always used to conceal her contempt for me. "Good morning, Dad. Are you calling Derek about something? He's busy preparing some important paperwork right now." I had no interest in playing games with her. My voice was cold and as level as freshly poured concrete. I just received Derek's message. Why was my name removed from the Alaska cruise? That's the trip I paid for to honor Diane. A soft giggle came from the other end of the line. The sound made my grip tighten around the phone, but my expression never changed. "Oh, Dad, don't overthink it." Monica sighed, her tone shifting into one of patronizing sympathy. "We only did it because we're worried about your health. The sea has been really rough lately. Someone your age could easily get sick out there. You're getting older and you're not as strong as you used to be. If something happened in the middle of the ocean, how could we possibly handle it? Just stay home and enjoy the peace and quiet. My parents will go in your place and help take care of Derek and the kids." She mocked me openly. To her, I was nothing more than a crumbling ruin that needed to be cleared away. Meanwhile, her sterling family was preparing to celebrate with my money. "You have everything you need at home anyway. Let us take care of the financial matters for you. Just relax, okay?" Monica spoke quickly and hung up before I could answer. The call ended. The long, repetitive tone echoed through the silent room. She thought she had won. She thought a few sugar-coated words would convince an old construction contractor to lock himself inside 4 walls and quietly accept his fate. But what she didn't realize was that the moment she ended that call was the exact moment I decided to fire up the demolition drill. I turned back to the computer screen and stared at the account where the money had been withdrawn. Monica's fake politeness hadn't been just about stealing the cruise. It had been a smokescreen. I clicked on the details of the latest withdrawal. $29,700. The money had been transferred to an anonymous account registered under the name of a private medical organization. My mind connected the pieces with the speed of an engineer. They didn't just want my money. They were building a trap designed to bury me for good. $29,700. The money hadn't been withdrawn all at once. It had been split into 3 perfectly calculated transactions. $9,900 each. It was a familiar pattern. Money launderers and fraudsters often structured transactions this way to avoid triggering automatic reporting systems within the federal banking network. My son and my daughter-in-law were carrying out something deeply suspicious behind my back. I shot to my feet. This had gone far beyond a stolen cruise. The foundation of my home didn't just have cracks anymore. Someone had planted explosives beneath it. I grabbed my car keys and walked straight into the garage. I needed to see the people draining my life with my own eyes. 30 minutes later, my car sat silently beneath a large oak tree 1 house away from Derek and Monica's Bellevue estate. I stepped out and quietly crossed the lawn to avoid making any noise. I knew every inch of this house. I had personally approved its blueprints and supervised the construction crew that built it. I walked around to the backyard, where the large sliding glass doors connected the living room to the garden. The doors weren't completely closed. A narrow gap had been left open just wide enough for voices to drift outside. I pressed myself into the shadows beside the brick wall. I stood perfectly still, like a concrete statue. Inside the living room, Monica's laughter echoed through the house. Her parents were there. So was Derek. Several thick folders lay spread across the coffee table. "Is everything ready?" Monica asked sharply, every trace of her fake sweetness gone. Derek hesitated for a moment before answering. "The doctor has received the full $29,700 in cash. He already signed the preliminary diagnosis. Next week, while we're on the cruise, the medical report will officially be submitted to the court." Monica burst into laughter. "Perfect. Once the court approves that your father has advanced Alzheimer's disease and his mentally incompetent, legal guardianship over the entire $20 million estate will belong to us. That senile old man will spend the rest of his life in a private psychiatric facility. He'll never be able to interfere in our lives again." My hand tightened against the brick wall. My fingertips throbbed with pain. Yet my mind had never been clearer. The final layer had been stripped away. My own son. The child I had raised. The child I had sacrificed everything for. He was using my own money to bribe a doctor. They were buying a death sentence for my freedom. They wanted to lock me inside a psychiatric institution so they could steal everything I had spent 40 years building. I stepped backward into the darkness. I wasn't shaking. Not a single tear fell. The heartbreak had hardened into a block of cold steel inside my chest. They believed they were dealing with a weak, easily manipulated 70-year-old man. But they had forgotten who I was. I was a builder. I knew how to construct, and I also knew how to demolish a rotten structure down to its very frame. I walked back to my car. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Mitchell Reed, the most feared legal shark in the city. The plan to strike back required a contractor with dirty hands and an ice-cold mind. I was sitting in Mitchell Reed's office at 2 o'clock that afternoon. The room was filled with the scent of expensive leather and cigar smoke. Mitchell wasn't an ordinary attorney. He was a legal shark, a man who specialized in handling the most brutal property disputes. In the construction industry, if you wanted to clear a site tangled in complicated legal conflicts, you called Mitchell. I placed the bank statements on his desk, along with the voice recorder containing the conversation I had just recorded at the Bellevue mansion. Mitchell didn't say a word. He put on his reading glasses and flipped through each page. The soft rustling of paper echoed steadily through the silent office. 10 minutes later, Mitchell took off his glasses. He looked me straight in the eye with the gaze of a predator that had just spotted valuable prey. "They're playing a very dangerous game, Harrison. That fake Alzheimer's diagnosis and the $29,700 in bribe money are evidence of criminal conduct. If you want, I can have the police arrest them as early as tomorrow." I shook my head. My fingers tapped lightly on the oak desk. I didn't want a quick and simple solution like that. Throwing them in prison immediately would be far too easy. They wanted to take away my freedom. They wanted to lock me inside the 4 walls of a psychiatric institution while enjoying the wealth built from my sweat. I wanted them to experience the feeling of having the entire world beneath their feet collapse completely. I wanted a demolition down to the very frame. Mitchell gave a cold smile and leaned back in his chair. "I understand. So where do we begin?" I unfolded the map of my assets. I pointed to the $2.2 million Bellevue mansion where Derek and his wife were living. Then I pointed to the $400,000 joint account. Finally, I pointed to the list of supplementary credit cards I had issued to them. "They're not fighting a weak old man. They're fighting the architect who built their world. I said, my voice calm but carrying the crushing weight of a block of concrete. I personally built the foundation that supports their arrogance. Now I'm going to pull that foundation out from under them. The plan was laid out over the next 2 hours. Mitchell wrote everything down with the absolute precision of an engineer preparing a construction schedule. Every piece was placed exactly where it belonged. Groundbreaking would begin the very next day when their cruise ship set sail. They would leave port with the triumph of people who believed they had stolen the treasure. What they didn't know was that the deck beneath their feet marked the beginning of a disaster. I walked out of Mitchell's office as the sun set over the city. A cold wind brushed across my face, but inside I burned like a blazing furnace. I wasn't going to cry over an ungrateful son. I was going to spend the next 3 days carrying out the largest financial overhaul of my life. When I arrived home, my phone displayed another notification with their travel itinerary. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock in the morning, the ship would leave port. I smiled. The trap had already been set, and my first move would begin at the very $2.2 million house they proudly called home. If you've stayed with me all the way to this point, then maybe you found this story interesting. Please do us one small favor, it only takes a moment. Like and subscribe. Leave a number 5 in the comments so I'll know you've made it this far, and include the name of your beloved city. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. The next morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, the proud blast of the ship's horn echoed from the harbor, announcing that the Alaska cruise had officially set sail. I sat in my car, watching the massive vessel slowly pull away from the dock through the windshield. Somewhere on that ship, my son, my daughter-in-law, and the Sterling family were raising their glasses to celebrate the beginning of what they believed would be a life of stolen luxury. They thought they had fooled me. They thought the fake Alzheimer's diagnosis was safely making its way through the legal system. But back on land, my large-scale demolition had already begun. I didn't waste a single second. When you tear down a rotten building, you take out the load-bearing columns first. The first move. Mitchell, Reed, and I walked into the office that managed my family trust. The $2.2 million Bellevue mansion, where Derek and Monica lived, still legally belonged to the trust under my control. They only had the right to live there. I placed the original trust agreement on the desk and signed the documents, immediately revoking their occupancy rights. Full control of the property returned to me. The second move. I went to the central bank. I presented proof of legal ownership, along with the authorization to withdraw the entire $400,000 from the joint account Derek and I shared. That money had been set aside to support our family business. Instead, my son had been using it to support the parasitic Sterling family. The bank employee looked at me with surprise, but I silently slid the signed paperwork beneath the glass partition. The financial lifeline feeding their luxurious lifestyle had officially been severed. The third move. This was the killing blow. I called Victor Rossi. He was one of the city's most notorious real estate sharks, a man who had always coveted the prime properties in Bellevue. We met at a small cafe. I pushed the property file for the mansion across the table. I'm selling you this house for $1.8 million. That's $400,000 below market value. But there's one strictly confidential condition. You must pay in cash within 3 days, and the moment the contract is signed, you have the legal right to clear every single item inside the house and throw it away. Victor Rossi smiled with undisguised greed. He didn't care about my family conflict. He cared only about profit. The purchase agreement was signed on the spot with Mitchell Reed serving as the witness. Derek and Monica's proud concrete fortress had been sold off before they had even traveled 1/3 of their voyage. All 3 moves were completed in less than 5 hours. The precision was that of an architect carefully placing demolition charges beneath a building's foundation. Legally, Derek and Monica were now homeless without knowing it. Their accounts had been emptied. Their home belonged to someone else. I stepped out of the cafe and looked up at the gloomy sky. Suddenly, my phone began vibrating nonstop. A stream of urgent notifications arrived from my bank's security system, all originating from the cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. Monica had begun swiping my supplementary credit card to pay for luxury services on board. I looked at the screen and allowed myself a faint smile. The fuse had been lit. Their celebration in the middle of the ocean was about to become the most humiliating nightmare of their lives. The banking alerts on my phone kept flashing, one after another. Monica had just charged $8,000 for a designer handbag at the ship's duty-free boutique. The next alert showed a $3,000 bill for her mother's luxury spa treatment. They were spending my money as though the supply would never run out. They had no idea that I had already cut off the source of that financial stream. I sat in my study and calmly pressed the button to deactivate every supplementary credit card I had issued to Derek and Monica. I severed every financial connection between myself and that cruise ship. The demolition continued in complete silence. At that very moment, in the middle of the open ocean, an extravagant champagne celebration was underway in the ship's five-star restaurant. The Sterling family occupied the center table, drawing the attention of every VIP passenger. Monica waved for the waiter to bring the bill for the most expensive bottle of champagne on the menu. With absolute confidence, she handed over the prestigious black credit card. The waiter swiped it through the terminal. A long electronic beep echoed through the room. The screen lit up and read, "Card declined." Monica frowned. The smile froze on her face. She assumed the machine had malfunctioned. She asked the waiter to run the card again. The same cold beep. The waiter looked at her differently now. His respectful expression had turned into one of suspicion. Monica's face began to flush. She quickly pulled out a second card, then a third. Each one produced the same merciless beep. Beside her, Derek broke into a nervous sweat. He hurriedly pulled out his phone to access the company's joint account and arrange an emergency transfer. Instead, the banking app displayed a single perfectly round number, 0. The $400,000 had vanished without a trace. The Sterling family's pride collapsed before hundreds of wealthy passengers inside the restaurant. Whispers spread from table to table. The same looks of contempt they had always directed toward me were now fixed squarely upon them. The restaurant manager approached and politely informed them that they would have to leave the VIP dining area because they were unable to settle the bill. There was no more champagne, no more luxury suite privileges, no more exclusive service. For the remainder of the voyage, the self-proclaimed elite Sterling family quietly stood in line with ordinary passengers to receive complimentary buffet meals. They endured humiliating embarrassment inside the crowded ship. There was nowhere to escape. Nothing but endless ocean surrounded them. I looked over the progress report Victor Rossi had sent me. The clearing of the Bellevue mansion had been completed. A cold smile crossed my face. Their humiliation in the middle of the ocean had been nothing more than the appetizer. When the ship finally docked and they stepped back onto solid ground, a direct collision with reinforced concrete would be waiting to crush whatever remained of their arrogance. The humiliating 7-day cruise finally came to an end. Late that afternoon, the taxi carrying Derek's family pulled up in front of the Bellevue mansion. I stood at a distance, concealed behind the row of trees along the street, watching the final scene unfold. The rotten foundation beneath their lives was finally ready to collapse. Monica stepped out of the taxi first. Her face was exhausted, stripped of every trace of the pride she had carried before spending an entire week standing in line for complimentary buffet meals. Her parents dragged their luggage behind them, grumbling nonstop. Derek followed silently, looking like a man who had lost his soul. But the moment they reached the front gate, the entire family froze. The familiar iron gate had been fitted with a brand new smart lock. Fastened to it was a bright red notice from the new owner, Rossi Real Estate Group. The house no longer belonged to them. "What is this?" Derek unlocked the gate. Monica screamed, completely losing control. She rushed forward and pounded on the gate with both fists. Derek's trembling fingers entered the old security code. The keypad flashed red. An alarm tone sounded. He had no idea what was happening. Panic spread across the faces of every greedy member of the family. Then Monica's mother suddenly pointed toward the sidewalk a few yards away and let out a horrified scream. Beside the garbage bins, every one of their belongings had been piled into a chaotic heap. Monica's designer clothes, Derek's expensive shoes, luxury handbags, jewelry, boxes of high-end cosmetics. Everything had been stuffed into torn cardboard boxes and black garbage bags. Above the pile hung a handwritten sign in thick black letters, "Free stuff. Help yourself." People passing by began gathering around. They whispered to one another. Then they started picking through the expensive belongings. "Don't touch my things." Monica charged toward them in a frenzy. She screamed like someone who had completely lost control in the middle of the street. She tried to snatch a designer handbag from the hands of a stranger. It was the ultimate humiliation. The Sterling family's carefully manufactured elegance was buried beneath the dirty puddles on the sidewalk. The moment Monica's parents saw the spectacle, They immediately backed away. They wanted no part of the humiliation. Without asking a single question, Mr. Sterling hurriedly flagged down another taxi that happened to be passing. They loaded their luggage into the trunk, rolled up the windows, and abandoned their own daughter and son-in-law in the middle of a crowd that laughed openly at them. Derek collapsed onto his knees beside the wreckage of his life. He buried his face in his hands. He had lost everything, his home, his money, and the last shred of his dignity. I climbed back into my car and quietly rolled up the window. Monica's screams gradually faded until they disappeared altogether. The structural demolition had been completed flawlessly. Now there was only one final brick left to place before the entire blueprint for my revenge would be complete. I looked at my phone as Derek's name flashed across the screen. I answered. My son's voice came through, trembling and choked with panic drowned beneath the noise of traffic. Dad, what's happening? My house. My money. It's all gone. Dad, where are you? I was sitting in the international airport terminal. The public address system calmly announced that my flight to Europe would soon begin boarding. I looked out across the runway. My voice remained as still as a windless lake. I don't have Alzheimer's, son. But I did have an awakening that changed my life. A deadly silence filled the other end of the line. Derek had no words left. He finally understood who had orchestrated the complete demolition of his world. I continued, each word striking like a hammer against a steel beam. The $29,700 you used to bribe that doctor was your biggest mistake. Every piece of evidence, the fraud, the fake medical records, all of it was delivered to the FBI by my attorney this morning. Your priority now isn't finding a place to live. It's finding a very good criminal defense lawyer. I ended the call. I had no desire to hear another excuse. No apology. No desperate plea. Every opportunity they had to do the right thing had already been rejected. The blueprint for my revenge had been completed down to the final brick. As I walked through the airport terminal, I reflected on everything that had happened. 40 years on construction sites had convinced me that giving my children a solid financial foundation was enough. I was wrong. I had forgotten to give them an equally solid moral foundation. Sometimes a father's endless tolerance creates children who betray the very hands that fed them. True strength doesn't come from power. It comes from choosing kindness even when life is at its hardest. But when kindness is twisted into a weapon against you, your response must be a complete demolition. Never allow your kindness to become a tool for someone else's abuse. Be kind, but keep a clear mind so you can protect yourself. I stepped onto the airplane ready for a new chapter of my life. One day I would take that Alaska cruise alone and fulfill the promise I had made to Diane in the way it deserved to be fulfilled. Thank you for staying with Dad's real-life revenge until the very end of this story. Join our community by liking this video and subscribing for more gripping family-centered stories inspired by real-life emotions and conflicts. And as always, thank you for being part of this community.